There's a wonderful story told by Leo Buscaglia, the popular speaker and writer on love and loving. In his classes at the University of Southern California, Buscaglia asks everyone to do something for somebody else. In one class, a student named Joel said, "What's there to do?" Buscaglia says his immediate reaction was very close to strangulation. But after collecting himself, he said, "Joel, come with me." And together they went to a nearby convalescent home. In Buscaglia's words, there were a lot of aged people lying around in beds in old cotton gowns, staring at the ceiling. Joel said, "What'll I do here? I don't know anything about gerontology." Buscaglia said, "Good. You see that lady over there? You go over and say hello." "That's all?" "That's all." Joel went over and said, hello." She looked at him suspiciously and said, "Are you a relative?" "No, I'm not." "Good," she said. "I hate my relatives. Sit down, son." And that started a beautiful relationship between the two, and between Joel and many of the other folks in the home. He started going to see them every week. Pretty soon they started calling that Joel's Day. Wonderful things began to happen on Joel's Day. Buscaglia says he knew he had really gotten through to Joel when he saw him one day walking across the campus like the Pied Piper, leading about 30 old people hobbling to a football game. In his book, Living, Loving, and Learning, Buscaglia's concluding words to this story are these: "What's there to do? Look around you. There's a lonely person next to you to touch. There's a hassled sales lady that needs you to tell her that she's great. What's there to do? It isn't monumental. It's teeny little things that make the difference. Small things, side by side by side." Buscaglia's last few words remind us of Edgar Cayce's frequent quote from Isaiah 28. "Precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little." It's a good beginning for a lesson in fellowship. According to the Cayce readings on fellowship, as we manifest love even in little ways toward our fellow human beings, as Joel did, we move our consciousness toward more complete fellowship with God. So fellowship really has two levels: fellowship with other human beings and fellowship with God. And the Cayce readings emphasize that the two levels are related. If we want to know how we stand with God, we can look at ourselves and see how we feel about other human beings. To say it the other way, we cut ourselves off from fellowship with God when we lack fellowship with humankind. Let's think about fellowship with others. What do we mean by fellowship? How do we recognize it when we see it or feel it? This would be a good place to pause the tape and define fellowship for yourself. What does fellowship mean to you? What tells you that it exists or doesn't exist in a specific situation? Pause the tape now for a minute or two and consider those questions. Here are some ideas of what fellowship is. Fellowship is reaching out, helping others bear their burdens, giving them support during their times of crisis and calamity, assuring them that you really care. It is also helping others understand themselves, letting them know they have a friend. Fellowship can mean seeing good in everyone, not looking for the faults in others, but for their virtues. Or it can be being kind when it is hardest, considerate of those who do not seem to appreciate it. And perhaps most important, it is forgiving others completely, loving them in spite of shortcomings we think they have, suffering with them if necessary. To many, the fundamental principle in fellowship is expressed as, "I am my brother's keeper." By the way, please understand that the word brother here means both men and women. And remember, being my brother's keeper means more than expressing an abstract kind of love for everyone in the world. It means taking responsibility for actively helping others, being of service to others, investing our time and our talents in others, not just thinking kindly about them. Take, for example, Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. A man traveling from Jerusalem was robbed, wounded, and left to die on the road. Just as we sometimes hear in the news today, two people came along, saw the man in difficulty, and kept right on going. They didn't feel it was their responsibility to stop and help the man, so they passed by on the other side. Along came the man from Samaria, who not only helped the other man take care of his wounds, but also took him to an inn and left money with the innkeeper for additional care if necessary, promising more if it was needed. The Samaritan accepted the responsibility of fellowship, actively serving others in need, even if it might not have been convenient or socially acceptable or without cost. Remember how this parable came about? A lawyer asked Jesus, "How do I inherit eternal life?" We might reword that to, "How do I achieve fellowship with God?" Jesus answered with the great commandment, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself." And when the lawyer said, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan. So it is an active and sometimes a tough service we have to give, when it would be so much easier to pass by on the other side. At another time, Jesus was teaching his disciples how souls will be judged. He said that one group would be blessed and possess the kingdom prepared for them, because, in his words, "When I was hungry, you gave me food. When thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you took me into your home. When naked, you clothed me. When I was ill, you came to my help. When in prison, you visited me." After hearing Jesus, his listeners denied ever having done these things for him, and Jesus replied, "Anything you did for one of my brothers here, however humble, you did for me." He continued by saying that those who did not do anything for others were to be left out of the kingdom. They would be shut off from fellowship with God. Another way of saying that fellowship with God is achievable only through true fellowship with our neighbors, our brothers, our fellow human beings. Many of us already know, deep down, that fellowship is all these things we've been talking about. If there's one lesson we know from the New Testament, it's probably that great commandment, to love the Lord with all your heart and soul and strength and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So how are we doing in realizing fellowship in our lives? This is a good place to pause the tape and consider some questions. How are we doing in achieving fellowship in our own lives? Are we reaching out to others? Seeing good in everyone? Forgiving others? Being kind and considerate when it's hardest? If the answer is less than we would like, what keeps us from doing better? Pause the tape now to consider such questions. There are two major stumbling blocks in realizing true human fellowship. One barrier is this. If we're talking about fellowship with our friends, or even with people we don't have any feelings about one way or the other, we can probably practice it without too much difficulty, if we apply our will and take the time. But if we're talking about people we consider our enemies, people we dislike, people we cannot tolerate, then fellowship seems almost impossible to achieve. This Casey lesson on fellowship reminds us that it's impossible to love God and hate our fellow human beings. It's not easy to love those who are not our friends. The only way we can do that is when forgiveness and love constantly motivate our actions, bolstered by the assertive power of our will. This is essential to achieving any degree of fellowship with those we dislike, those we ignore, and those we consider our enemies. The second major barrier is our human frailty in committing ourselves to compassion. Two recent books, written from very different viewpoints, address this issue of compassion and illustrate how selective we are in allowing it to move us. One book, written by McNeill, Morrison, and Newen, is called Compassion, a reflection on the Christian life. These authors recognize that we all experience the occasional incident of natural compassion, where we are moved to help a lonely old person, a hurt or handicapped person, a hungry person. How much more difficult to go beyond such easy compassion, in their words, to go where it hurts, to enter places of pain, to share in brokenness, fear, confusion, and anguish. The authors go further by suggesting that our massive exposure today to human misery, via television and other media, leads us to a kind of psychological numbness to misery and the conditions that bring it about. Our minds don't like being reminded of things that interfere with what we're doing at the moment. That mental numbness, in turn, can lead to hostility, to anger instead of caring, to irritation instead of sympathy, to fury instead of compassion. Often we seem to want to be compassionate on our terms, when we choose the situations and the individuals, when it is convenient in our busy lives, even though we're trying to raise our spiritual awareness. When we recognize this is happening and why, only then can we begin to make choices differently. Another book acknowledging how difficult it is to be truly compassionate is called How Can I Help?, written by Ram Dass and Paul Gorman. They state, our impulses to care for one another often seem instinctive. The more we're able to act on them freely, the more opportunity we have to feel whole and be helpful. But there are clearly many ways in which we hesitate to reach out, or we get confused when we try. The reasons for this don't appear to be simple at all. Perhaps it's due to conditioning or custom. These authors encourage us to identify the inner obstacles to our caring instincts, our natural compassion. By watching for and defining these blocks in ourselves, we can strip away their power and reduce their influence over us. They acknowledge that when we try to move in the more compassionate direction, we may stumble, fall, and even look and feel a little foolish. But the rewards are great, not only in relieving suffering, but in our growth toward wisdom and unity, a step toward fellowship with God through fellowship with humankind. Ram Dass and Paul Gorman report how one man tries to catch himself suppressing his natural compassion, starting to call up the stereotypes of his position and his environment, instead of looking at a situation with a new perspective. This man explains it this way. I catch myself in self-importance 10 times a day. Check that 5. Well, maybe once. It's appalling anyway. A little flashbulb goes off and I'm exposed, like when Jimmy Olsen caught Superman changing his clothes in the phone booth. Of course, whoever I'm with has probably been seeing all this self-importance in me for hours, before I ever notice. What I've done, really, is I've begun. I've just started to watch myself as I go through these little prances. I actually have this exercise I sometimes perform. I get up out of my chair, walk away a few steps, stand for a moment, and then turn around and walk back and sit down again. The one who is now seated is usually not the same one who was there before. I'm no longer that guy, for a while anyway. I should add that this exercise frequently appears quite mad to other people in the room, particularly if they're people who have come to me for some kind of assistance. They're thinking, this is the guy I've come to for help? Funny. So I perform these exercises at considerable cost to my aura of authority, you understand. But it's definitely worth it. Freedom is priceless, worth whatever the cost. Each of us has built a complex structure of habitual responses to situations we encounter. Otherwise, we would not be able to cope with a lot of what happens in our lives every day. Some of those responses include words like these. I'd really like to help out, but, or if only I had the time to give to this effort. Other responses are more convoluted, like, I wonder if George would really want me there. He might prefer being alone at a time like this. Or, like Joel in Buscaglia's story, I really don't know anything about that kind of situation. I wouldn't be of any help. And to ourselves we might be saying, and I could look pretty foolish. So in order to realize fellowship with others, we must get past two main barriers. We must learn to practice fellowship with those we would rather ignore, and we must overcome habitual responses that limit our natural capacity for compassion. This doesn't mean we have to start a social movement or a world crusade. On the contrary, Edgar Cayce's readings point out that there's no better place to practice fellowship and brotherly love than in the home. Cayce's readings also emphasize that we have two very effective personal tools to help us keep alive within us the perfect harmony we need for fellowship, the tools of meditation and prayer. So for the rest of this lesson, we will work with these to take our next steps towards realizing greater fellowship with humankind and thus with God. One of the great contributions of the Cayce readings is the series of affirmations he gave for these lessons. Each affirmation contains the essence of a spiritual principle or ideal. Cayce's affirmations often contain phrases we can use in our prayers, and if we want to align ourselves with one of these ideas during meditation, we can use the affirmation or a phrase from it as a focus for our conscious minds when we begin to meditate. Here is the affirmation for this lesson from the readings. How excellent is thy name in the earth, O Lord! Would I have fellowship with thee, I must show brotherly love to my fellow man. Though I come in humbleness and have aught against my brother, my prayer, my meditation does not rise to thee. Help thou my efforts in my approach to thee. The main idea of that affirmation is this: to realize oneness with God, I must show brotherly love to my fellow human beings. If I hold anything against someone, my prayers and meditation do not seem sincere, regardless of how humble I try to be. So please help me, God, to bring about fellowship with others, so I may realize fellowship with you. We can use part of this affirmation, with prayer and meditation, to help overcome the barriers that we talked about earlier. One, by learning to practice fellowship with those we would rather forget, and the other, by learning to release our natural compassion, to reach out and serve the needs of others. Let's work first on the issue of individuals we dislike or even consider our enemies. Begin by making yourself comfortable. If you have books or papers in your hands or lap, set them aside. Then settle into a relaxed, comfortable position, either sitting or lying down. For a minute or so, just relax and notice your breathing. Don't try to change it in any way. Just notice the gentle flow of air into your lungs, and then the easy release of the air from your lungs. Breathe in slowly, then breathe out slowly, and continue in this manner for a minute or so. Try to keep your mind clear of thoughts. Now focus your attention on this affirmation. To have fellowship with God, I must first have fellowship with others. To have fellowship with God, I must first have fellowship with others. Continue focusing on this affirmation for 1 minute. Now think about one person you are having a hard time with. You may dislike this person. You may feel you could not reach out to help them. You may feel you can never forgive this person, or you cannot overlook what you see as their faults. Picture this person in your mind. Now pray for this person. Pray that you will understand one another better. Pray that you can be a channel of blessings to this person. Pray that this person will forgive you for your unkind thoughts about him or her. Pray for support in forgiving the person for whatever is in the past and present. And pray that the future be filled with love and fellowship between you. And while you pray, visualize the person as being pleasant, maybe even smiling. Visualize the two of you together, shaking hands, hugging, or just being together. You will have 1 minute for your own prayer. Now give your relationship with this person over to God. Remember that God is in us all, so how can we not be loving to everyone? Try praying with words such as these. This person is thine, Lord, and I am thine, Lord. The light shines in him as it does in me. Do with both of us as you will. You may repeat this prayer activity for other individuals, one at a time. For each person, visualize your improving relationship while you seek forgiveness and seek guidance for being a channel of blessing, love, and fellowship. In this prayerful manner, you can turn the first of the stumbling blocks into a stepping stone. We'll conclude this lesson with a short meditation for attunement. First, continue to relax and be comfortable as you were for the prayers. Now, as a focus for your attunement through meditation, concentrate on the feelings that accompany compassion. Think of a situation in which you normally feel a great deal of compassion. Get in touch with this feeling now. Hold that feeling of compassion as you begin to meditate. Let it fill your body, your mind, and your spirit as you release yourself to the silence. Turn off the tape while you meditate, and turn it back on when you are ready to proceed with the final suggestions. As a final experience in realizing greater compassion and fellowship, let your mind consider specific ways you can be compassionate. Think of something you could do for a member of your family or a friend, something you have never done before. Ask yourself questions such as these. Why have I not done it before? What would eliminate those barriers? Would I feel good about doing it now? Continue with this until you feel yourself committed to trying something you've never done before, something that will let you release your natural compassion. If you have used the opportunities suggested in this lesson, you have taken the first steps toward greater fellowship with both God and humankind. From now on, you can be your own best teacher of this lesson. The next time you find yourself with unkind thoughts about another person, first recognize that you are having such thoughts. Then, remember that the light shines through that person. Be forgiving and not judging. Turn the relationship over to God, to do with both of you as he will. And the next time you see an opportunity to reach out with compassion, observe your immediate reactions that lead you either to help or not to help. Your goal will be to strengthen the helping reactions you observe and to minimize any desire to pass by on the other side. As you progress through these lessons, you will recognize that our spiritual path is strewn with marvelous challenges. It helps if we keep in mind the promises of fellowship. In his poem Endymion, John Keats suggests what awaits us at the end of our path. Wherein lies happiness? In that which becks our ready minds to fellowship divine, a fellowship with essence, till we shine, full alchemized and free of space.